Hello and welcome to another track guide in a HYMO track guide series. Today we're going to Japan, to the land of the rising sun, and we're gonna talk about Suzuka. A very well known track with long history and various prestigious races held there at that track. A very interesting circuit, loved by the drivers, very technical. It requires a lot out of the driver, but it requires also a lot out of the car. Both the driver needs to know what to do to get the most out of the track, but also the car has to be prepared to allow the driver to take full advantage of the car's potential and ultimately be able to do a certain lap time. Suzuka is really known for its track surface. The tarmac here is very slippery, a lot more slippery than other circuits, and in ACC you can definitely feel it. The car behaves a little bit differently than you would normally be used to. In a lot of the cases you'll notice that in many traction zones where it's going to be very difficult to put that power down, and majority of the times you'll be putting down the power while the car is still rotating, and that rear is going to be constantly trying to step out. I think Suzuka is gonna be one of those tracks where it's all gonna be about compromises. Of course, in racing, everything about compromises, but Suzuka takes it to another level. Both from the driving perspective, you'll have to compromise certain corners and certain lines to gain time elsewhere, but also from car setup perspective, the track will require a car that will have at the same time a lot of stability, but a lot of rotation, great agility at low speed, but also really good traction. And you can't have all four. It will have to be a really good compromise. But having just one not be there is already gonna be a big time loss and a car that's not really gonna be that nice to drive. It seems like you can never get the car to behave exactly how you like it to be. There's always something wrong with it. It always goes back and forth, and it seems like Suzuka just accentuates those problems that you're going to be having. If you want a really nice setup for this week of LFM, head over to Track Titan, where you can get HYMO setups. From now, we're not only offering our esports setups, but we've also added a safe setup option. Those setups will have way more focus on drivability, and they're gonna be overall way more user friendly. All links are in the description. There's a link to Track Titan, there's a link to also our HYMO hideout. If you have any questions out there, we'll be happy to offer you some help. Okay, so without further ado, let me take you around the lap of Suzuka with a time of 1:57.8 and tell you all about it. Okay, turn 1, a very difficult braking zone. You wanna push that braking zone as deep into the corner as possible, but at the same time minimize the amount of braking you're gonna be doing while turning. So what I do here is I'm gonna divide the braking into one more of a straight line braking zone, then let off the brakes and go into the second part of the corner that's way more tighter while braking again and turning into the second part of the corner. For that first part, when you're gonna be leveled with the exit road, position the car in a way that you're gonna be pointing towards the inside of the corner from the very outside, and then after you pass the exit road on the left, stomp on the brake and decelerate from 6th to 4th gear in a straight line. I feel like on Suzuka there's gonna be a lot of places where it's gonna be extremely difficult to pick your reference points for braking, and your braking is gonna be about just your perception of distance and getting the feel for where exactly you need to go on the brakes. Here for your references you can take that exit road on the left and also the curb on the inside and basically brake between those two. Slowly bring the car to the inside and wait patiently with the throttle. Coast here a little and make sure the car is stable. Then you can start braking for the second part of the corner and tighten up the corner from 4th to 3rd gear. In some cars you can even go down to 2nd. As you hit the apex, go on the throttle. But remember, with that slippery Suzuka surface, traction zones are gonna be an issue, and if you're too aggressive with the throttle when you're still turning, the rear is gonna step out. So as you're adding accelerator, do it smoothly and make sure to release the steering to make sure that the car is gonna be stable and will put down all that power. You can use all that exit curb on the exit, but remember to come back onto a track as fast as possible, not to go over the grass that's on the outside, and you're also gonna want to transition the car to the right side of the road because the next corner is gonna be a left-hander. Now, regarding those compromises, depending what speed you're gonna bring into the corner, sometimes you're gonna be a bit slower, then you can take the second part tighter and accelerate earlier. On the other hand, if you're gonna bring way higher speed into the corner, maybe you're gonna go a tiny bit wide entering the second part of the corner, you're gonna have to wait more patiently with the throttle, but you're gonna have time gained through carrying more speed throughout the first part of turn 1. Because of all those different approaches, I really encourage people to experiment with those different approaches, see what works for them with their driving, see what works for their car or their setup. There's gonna be different approaches and they're all gonna work, but they're gonna work in a different way. Sometimes you're gonna have to compromise that entry, but then gains a little bit more speed in the middle of the corner and on the exit. Sometimes you're gonna compromise the mid corner and the exit, but you're gonna carry a lot of speed through that entry and first part of the corner. Now, the Esses. Already turn 1 was like a very long turn that was consisting out of 2 parts, and depending how you enter the first part, that was defining the second part. The same is gonna go with the Esses through the whole rest of the sector 1, where depending on how you take the previous S, that's gonna determine what you need to do throughout the next one. And then that one you'll have to do in a certain way to prepare the next one. You're gonna be compromising one turn to then prepare the next one, and so on and so on. When the tire wall on the right side that has white, red and green accents meets that later gray barrier, that's when you wanna get to the right hand side of the road and already start turning left. Commit into the first S quite early because you want to get into the camber of the road that is there on the inside, and you also are gonna use a little bit of curb on the inside to help you with early rotation. When the track is rubbered up, the rubber on the road will help you a little throughout the whole sector 1 to know where that line is gonna be, but it's just gonna be an indication. Don't drive looking at that line. It's just gonna help you understand somewhat where you should position the car. So here, commit into the corner early, you can see how the car gets into the camber of the road, and here it gains grip, and on top of that you climb the curb on the inside. Don't go fully over it, just climb it, and it helps you rotate the car further in the middle of the corner. The first S is going to be all about how much speed you can carry through it while being able to position the car for the next right-hander in this position. Don't go all the way to the right, you need to open up the next right-hander a little bit, otherwise you'll have to brake a lot more for the next corner, because you'll make it a lot tighter of a corner than it would have been otherwise. As you're exiting out of that camber of the road that was helping you corner through the left-hander, do the transition. Brake, turn right, downshift. Story here is gonna be the same, try to carry as much speed through the right-hander as possible, but in a way that you can open up the next one. Here the space between this right-hander and the next left-hander is a tiny bit bigger than between first two S's, so you have time to just open up the corner here on the exit a tiny bit, go to the outside, but then straight away transition back to the middle of the road and point the car towards the left to position the car for the entry into the third S. In the first S there was a lot of grip, but from now on every single corner is going to be a lot more sketchy. You can definitely feel here that slippery Suzuka surface, so be careful and watch out what the rear end is doing, because it can step out and you'll have to control it, and it is a potential time loss if you won't control that rotation properly. Be decisive and committed during those transitions, but stay smooth, and every time you go on the throttle, release the steering, so you're not making the rear tires work too much in both directions, longitudinally and laterally. The third S is basically going to be a copy-paste of the second one, it's just that it's going to be a left-hander, not a right-hander. If you want, you can climb the curb on the inside for some extra rotation, and again be very careful with the rear end, as it's going to be likely to step out on the exit. Again, don't go fully to the right on the exit, just open up the second to last S just a tiny bit. Decisive transition to put the load on the front axle to help you turn through the second to last S. Here from the middle of the corner the track is gonna start going down the hill, so you're gonna feel like you're losing grip and the car is gonna tend to understeer. The corner is long, so you have to stay a lot off the throttle. You're gonna be decelerating through majority of the corner. Here on the exit you're gonna want to be as much on the right side of the road as possible to open up the last, fastest and the longest corner in the whole section. The track is going down the hill, so the car is gonna tend to understeer on the exit. You can try to be very aggressive here on the throttle, help the car continue that rotation by being aggressive on the throttle and rotating the rear end a little bit to keep the car as much to the inside of the road and to the right as possible. And now the last S, probably the most challenging one and the most difficult to get right. Very aggressive transition from the very outside to open up the corner as much as possible. Now you're gonna hit the compression where the track is gonna start going up the hill and you're gonna gain grip. That alone is not gonna be sufficient enough to give you enough front end to clear the last S. So when you're hitting the compression, when you're finally gaining a front grip, go also off the throttle, help load up that front axle, and you can even use the curb on the inside just to help you at that rotation. Just be careful, try to give the front as much grip as possible and use it where that grip is there in the compression, but don't over rotate the car. If you overdo it and over rotate the car, you'll have to do the correction, probably you'll slow down, you're gonna lose the speed and the momentum you're gonna be carrying throughout the next straight up to Degner's. If you don't do it too much, you're gonna understeer and potentially go wide into the gravel, or you're gonna just have to wait with the throttle patiently for understeer to disappear, and again you're gonna lose momentum and the speed that you're gonna be carrying down the straight up until Degner's. A lot of feel and finesse required here to get this corner right. As you can see, throughout the entire first sector, every single corner, you have to compromise the exit of the previous corner to gain a bit more time throughout the next one. But then this one will have to be again compromised in a certain way to gain more time in the next one. I encourage you to play and experiment with different approaches. Different approaches will give you different results, and you just have to see for yourself to get the feeling for how much you have to slow down through the corner A to gain that time back, or even more in corner B. Now, the two Degners. For the first one, as you're approaching the 50-meter board, go on the brakes and downshift to 4. You can cut entire curb on the inside while still keeping the outside tires on the tarmac. As you're going over the curb, already start releasing the steering to the outside while you're landing to help the car settle down and stabilize before next braking zone on the curb. Track limits, very tricky here. You wanna obviously use all the track and carry as much speed as possible throughout the whole Degner 1, but if you go wide it's extremely easy to get here warning, and also because the exit of Degner 1 is at the same time the entry to Degner 2, it's easy to get 2 warnings here, because then the game is gonna think that you were wide and in Degner 1 on the exit and you gain time there, you're gonna get 1 warning for that, and then if you're gonna gain time through Degner 2, you were also wide on the entry to that, so you're gonna get 2nd warning in Degner 2, and by being off the track here, you're gonna get 2 warnings, one after another. Very important to avoid that during the race. Next braking zone into Degner 2 is gonna be really tricky, depending also on the car, because you're braking on the curb, and the car is gonna likely to start scraping the ground, and it can bottom out on that curb. Again, in terms of setup here, we're gonna have through both Degners few compromises in terms of setup, because you want to make the car clear curbs. Not only clear big curbs like the first Degner, where you want to have the car that A, climbs it really nicely, and B, settles down from a big curb really nicely, but also the next curb during braking into Degner 2, you don't want to have a car that really bottoms out a lot. You want to control that front right height and not have the car that dives a lot, because then you're gonna scrape way too much on those curves like here. And also similar curves you're gonna have in Spoon and 130R, and you have to use them. So you're gonna have to have a car which front end isn't fully buried into the ground, because then you're not gonna be able to drive over those curves in Degner 2, in Spoon and in 130R. From my experience, the car is way more likely to jump here or fully bottom out and go straight when the car is on the very left side of the curb, riding the track limits throughout the whole braking zone. So just go to the edge of track limits as you're exiting Degner 1, but then go more to the middle of that curb and brake there. So you're opening up the second Degner just a little bit, but if you're too wide, the car is gonna bottom out completely and you're gonna go straight into that grass and gravel ahead of you. For the braking marker here on the left, you can use those green AstroTurfs that you're going over. One of them is a lot darker, and as you're going over that darker one, that's when you hit the brakes. When a car finally stops scraping and regains full grip on the tarmac, start turning in and trail braking into the apex of Degner 2. Another corner that's cambered to the inside, so as you're turning in and as you're getting towards the middle of the corner, the car is gonna gain a lot of grip. You can cut the inside curb a little here, but I don't think it's necessary to fully cut it, because then you're actually gonna lose that front grip that you're gaining with the camber of the road, because you're gonna have to climb the curb and you're gonna unload because of that front tires as you're climbing it. So you can cut it just a bit to make the corner more open for you, as long as you're not compromising the front grip in the middle of the corner too much. As you're on the apex, go on the throttle, and again, slippery surface, watch out for the rear end stepping out. As you're going on the throttle, straight away release the steering and point the car towards the outside of the road. Use all the track on the exit. Track limits are again track plus the red and white curb. Next corner, a very tight hairpin. Because of again those setup compromises needed at Suzuka, you're likely gonna be running a setup that's gonna have more stability. You're gonna be probably running higher brake bias, maybe a higher TC settings. So just to help you with the agility and the rotation for that hairpin, you can use that small straight after Degner 2 to bump the brake bias down a few clicks. You can go with traction control down to a lower setting to help you with the acceleration out of the hairpin, so the car doesn't bog down on a high TC setting out of low speed hairpin. You want to do majority of the braking obviously in as straight line as possible, so stick to the left side of the road, and very late transition the car to the right side of the road, so then after the curb on the inside stops, then you go fully on the brakes on the right hand side of the track. After the hairpin, we're gonna have a big long full throttle section, so obviously we want to prioritize the exit here, but don't go too wide on the entry, because again the track is cambered on the inside, so you can actually commit to the apex quite early and use that camber that is on the inside to gain grip and rotate the car while braking to the apex. The car is gonna get lovely rotation mid-corner, and then you can as soon as possible go on throttle, use the TC and open up the steering to start gaining momentum as soon as possible out of the hairpin. Go back up with brake bias and TC settings to what you were previously doing. Obviously sometimes it's not needed, and in the race maybe you don't want to fiddle with those, not to get it wrong. Sometimes, you know, in the heat of the moment you can turn off the traction control when you're approaching that hairpin, so it's obviously more dangerous. You can gain a bit of time and just confidence under braking into the hairpin there with lower brake bias. Obviously if you don't feel confident fiddling with those settings, there's no need to do so, especially during the race. Here, stick kinda to the middle of the road. It's not necessarily the best line to take the path of least resistance. In ACC and in quite a few places it's actually better to take the shortest route, even though it feels like you're scrubbing the tires a bit. Now we're approaching Spoon, a very complex and complicated corner, very difficult to get right again. As you're approaching the braking zone for the first part, try to look for the bit of green AstroTurf on the outside. When it starts, that's gonna be your braking point. Right as it starts, go on the brake and brake diagonally towards the first curb on the inside. Throughout the first part, the goal is to carry as much speed as possible without going too wide on the exit. Depending on your setup, you're gonna be able to go over the curb on the outside without the car being unsettled too much. But if you don't really have a car that can consistently go over that curb and with no issues go into the second part of the corner, then it's better to just use the red and white part of the curb. Don't go fully over it. Before the second part of the corner, there's gonna be a small acceleration zone, just keep the speed up. But now there's gonna be second part of the Spoon, arguably the most difficult traction zone on the track. As the curb on the outside is ending, you wanna go again on the brakes, load up the front tire to initiate the rotation really early, and then from the outside do a sweeping line, tightening up the corner, and you wanna apex somewhere around where you can see the rubber laying on the inside curb. go on the throttle, but then straight away release the steering to help with the traction. The truck is gonna again start going slightly downhill, and overall car's grip is gonna be compromised. Straighten out the car as much as possible to let it accelerate freely and gain momentum as soon as possible out of the corner. Use all the track on the outside, but there's gonna be again similar curb that you're gonna have to go over as it was in Degner 2. You can go over it pretty easily, but just make sure that you're not in need of turning anymore, because then you can easily bottom out on it. The car is gonna jump a little, but then it's gonna stop rotating. It's just gonna jump and go in a straight line, and you can easily exceed track limits like that. So as you're going over the exit curb, be already in a straight line, and then even though the car is scraping the ground a little bit, you're gonna clear it with no problem. Take the shortest route to the next corner, which is gonna be the famous 130R. Depending on the car as well as the setup, you're gonna have to lift for 130R, but some cars, especially Porsche, they can do it flat. But in majority of the cases, you're gonna have to lift for 130R, because you're also gonna be going at a faster speed than in a Porsche, and you're probably not gonna have a car with that much ability to rotate at high speed as Porsche has with an eSport setup. As you're passing by the 50-meter board, start turning from the outside towards the apex and start lifting off the throttle. Do it with one very smooth movement. You can touch the curb on the inside, but don't overdo it. Don't fully climb it and go over it, because then you can unsettle the car very easily in the middle of the corner. After you clear the curb, the car goes down and drops into the camber of the road again. When it settles, go back on the throttle and you release the steering towards the curb on the outside. Here, somewhat similarly to how the exit of Spoon looked like, you don't want to turn too much when you're on that curb, because you can easily get the right hand side of the splitter too low, and then that's gonna bottom out on the curb, as well that the tires are going over the curb and they're loaded up heavily, so you don't really want to be in the situation where you're gonna go over the lateral limit of the rear tire, and then you're gonna get into a spin, and one that's likely gonna be very difficult to catch. For the braking into the next chicane, you have the braking boards on the left that you can use for as your references. There's a 150 board and 100 meter board. You want to brake between them at 125 meter mark. Brake in the straight line, sticking to the left, and then as you're going under Yokohama Bridge, you can start trail braking and bringing the car to the inside of the road. You can do it quite early because you're gonna be cutting a lot of the first part of the chicane. Track limits are again track plus the red and white curb, so you can cut quite a lot here as long as your outside tires are still on that curb. Just be careful not to overdo it. You're coming from a very difficult, heavy braking zone. It's easy to sometimes go too wide. It's also very easy to cut too much of that curb, so just be careful not to overdo it, how much of that curb you're cutting. Really easy to get a warning here. It would be a shame to get a drive-through for track limits here and lose SRO championship. So don't cut too much. Cutting the inside here will allow you to open up the exit as much as possible, and we have the longest straight on the track after that chicane. So you want to open up that exit as much as possible, so you're cutting a lot of the first part to position the car as much on the right hand side of the track during the transition. The last curb here, there are gonna be different approaches and ways of cutting that curb depending on what you prefer as a driver and also what certain cars are able to take. Theoretically, you can cut exactly the same amount as you cut in the first part, but I prefer to leave the outside tire still on the tarmac, as I'm gonna be already accelerating and I want the right rear tire to have maximum traction and already propel me forward, start gaining the momentum. Just before you go on the curb, lift off the throttle just to get the front end to bite, and as you're going over the curb, you can already start adding the throttle and releasing the car to the outside of the road. Accelerating really early, gaining as much momentum. You can use the exit curve to help you open up the exit, but don't use too much of it, as you have to go back from the curb to the track, not to cut the grass that is at the end of that outside curb. Now it's just full throttle to the line while trying to stick to the inside as much as possible, but again, reminder, track is slippery, and if you have a car that rotates a lot, the rear is gonna try to step out, so yes, try to minimize how much distance you're covering, but don't over-rotate the car, because then the rear will actually step out and you're engage TC and stop gaining that momentum that you worked for so hard through the chicane. So that's the lap of Suzuka. Now I'm gonna roll the footage so you can see the full lap at full speed. So that's the track guide for Suzuka done. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like, maybe leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, there's definitely more coming in the future. Don't forget to check out Track Titan and HYMO Discord, links are in the description. But apart from that, big thanks for watching and hopefully see you in the next one.